Jake Morrison had always been a man of simple pleasures. At 32, he owned the largest cattle ranch in Millbrook County, a sprawling piece of land that his grandfather had passed down to him. The ranch house sat on a hill overlooking miles of green pasture where his prize-winning cattle grazed peacefully. Jake's days started before sunrise and ended long after sunset, filled with the honest work of mending fences, herding cattle, and maintaining the property that meant everything. To him, the townspeople of Millbrook respected Jake for his hard work and fair dealing, but they also whispered about his solitary nature. He had been burned by love once, 10 years ago, when his fiancée Sarah had left him 3 days before their wedding. She had packed her bags and moved to the city, claiming that ranch life was too lonely and boring for her. The betrayal had cut deep, leaving Jake with a hardened heart and a firm belief that love was nothing but a fairy tale that foolish people told themselves. Jake's routine was predictable and comforting. Every morning he would wake up at 5, make himself a strong cup of coffee, and head out to check on his animals. His loyal border collie, Rusty, would follow him everywhere, the only companion Jake felt he needed. The dog had been with him for 8 years. Jake often joked that Rusty was more reliable than any human he had ever known. The ranch employed 5 full-time workers, all good men who respected Jake's privacy and work ethic. They knew better than to ask about his personal life or suggest he should find himself a wife. Jake paid them well, treated them fairly, and expected nothing but hard work in return. The arrangement suited everyone perfectly. On weekends, Jake would drive his old pickup truck into town to buy supplies and groceries. He would nod politely to the shopkeepers, exchange a few words about the weather or cattle prices, and head back to his ranch. The people of Millbrook had long since stopped trying to set him up with their daughters or sisters. Jake Morrison was a confirmed bachelor, and everyone accepted that fact. The town of Millbrook was small, with just over 3,000 residents. Main Street stretched for 6 blocks, lined with family-owned businesses that had been operating for generations. There was Henderson's hardware store, Murphy's Diner, the First National Bank, and Wilson's General Store. At the end of Main Street stood the old church, where Jake's parents had been married 40 years ago, though Jake hadn't attended a service. Since Sarah had left him, Jake's ranch was a 20-minute drive from town, isolated enough to provide the solitude he craved, but close enough for practical purposes. He had electricity and running water, but no internet or cable television. In the evenings, he would read books about cattle breeding or ranch management, listen to country music on his old radio, sit on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The neighbors closest to Jake's ranch were the Petersons, an elderly couple who lived 5 miles away. Mrs. Peterson occasionally brought Jake homemade pies. Mr. Peterson would sometimes ask for help with heavy lifting around their property. Jake was always willing to help, but these interactions were brief and practical, never social. Jake's bedroom was sparse and functional, containing only a bed, a dresser, and a small desk where he kept his ranch records. There were no photographs. On the walls, no decorative items that might remind him of romantic notions. He had removed all traces of Sarah from his life within a week of her departure, burning the photos and packing away the engagement ring that had cost him 3 months' salary. The kitchen was the heart of Jake's simple home life. He cooked basic meals for himself, usually meat and potatoes, sometimes with vegetables from the small garden he maintained behind the house. He had learned to cook out of necessity, and while his meals were plain, they were filling and nutritious. Jake took pride in being completely self-sufficient. In the living room, stone fireplace dominated one wall, providing warmth during the harsh winter months. The furniture was practical leather pieces that could withstand the wear and tear of ranch life. Jake's collection of books filled several shelves, mostly technical manuals about cattle and ranching. With a few classic westerns thrown in for entertainment, Jake's daily routine rarely varied. After his morning chores, he would spend the afternoon repairing equipment, checking fences, or moving cattle to different pastures. The physical work kept him strong and tired enough to sleep soundly each night. He found satisfaction in the tangible results of his labor, the healthy cattle and well-maintained property that represented his life's work. The townspeople often wondered what would become of Jake's ranch when he got older. He had no family. left no children to inherit the land that had been in his family for 3 generations. But Jake never worried about such things. He lived in the present, focusing on the immediate needs of his animals and property. On this particular autumn morning, Jake noticed that his usual contentment felt slightly hollow. He pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to the changing season. The leaves on the oak trees around his house were turning gold and red, and there was a crispness in the air that signaled winter's approach. Soon, he would need to prepare for the colder months, ensuring his cattle had adequate shelter and feed. As Jake loaded hay bales into his truck, Rusty suddenly perked up his ears and looked toward the road. A small dust cloud indicated that someone was driving up the long gravel driveway to the ranch house. Visitors were rare, and Jake wondered who might be coming to see him on this quiet Thursday morning. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward the house, Rusty trotting beside him, both of them curious about this unexpected interruption to their routine. The pickup truck that pulled up to Jake's ranch house was not one he recognized. It was a faded blue Ford with gardening tools visible in the back bed, along with what appeared to be potted plants and flowers. Jake frowned, wondering if someone had made a wrong turn trying to find another property. As he approached the vehicle, the driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman who immediately took his breath away. She was petite, probably 5 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulder length auburn hair that caught the morning sunlight. She wore practical jeans and a green flannel shirt, but something about the way she carried herself suggested an elegance that Jake had never seen in ranch country. Her face was heart-shaped with high cheekbones, and when she smiled at him, her green eyes sparkled with warmth and intelligence. "Good morning," she said, extending her hand toward Jake. "I'm Emma Rodriguez. I just moved to Millbrook, and I was wondering if you might be interested in purchasing some flowers for your property." Jake stared at her outstretched hand for a moment before remembering his manners and shaking it briefly. Her skin was soft but showed the calluses of someone who worked with her hands. "I'm Jake Morrison," he replied gruffly. "I don't have much." "Use for flowers around here?" Emma's smile never wavered. She gestured toward his ranch house and the surrounding grounds. "This is a beautiful place you have here. I can imagine how lovely it would look with some color around the house and maybe along the driveway. Flowers don't just look pretty, they also attract beneficial insects and can help with soil health." Jake found himself studying her face as she spoke. There was a passion in her voice when she talked about plants and flowers that reminded him of his own enthusiasm for cattle breeding. Despite his initial resistance, he was curious about this woman who had appeared at his ranch like something out of a dream. "Where did you move from?" Jake asked, surprising himself with the question. He rarely made small talk with strangers, but something about Emma made him want to know more. "Phoenix," Emma replied, leaning against her truck. "At a successful flower shop there for 8 years, but city life started to wear me down. When my grandmother passed away last month, she left me a small inheritance. I decided to use it to start fresh somewhere quieter and more peaceful." Jake nodded, understanding the appeal of rural life, though he wondered why anyone would voluntarily give up city conveniences. "What made you choose Millbrook?" Kama's eyes lit up as she looked across his pastures toward the distant mountains. "I drove through here about 3 months ago while researching small towns. There's something special about this place, the way the land rolls and the mountains frame the horizon. It felt like home immediately." Jake had lived here all his life and had never thought much about the landscape's beauty, but seeing it through, Emma's eyes made him notice details he had overlooked. The way the morning light painted the grass, the majestic sweep of the mountains in the distance, the peaceful way his cattle moved across the pasture. "So you're starting a flower business here?" Jake asked, genuinely curious now. "I've rented a small building on Main Street," Emma explained. "It used to be a bakery, but it's been empty for 2 years. I'm converting it into a flower shop and hoping to eventually do landscaping work for people who want to beautify their properties." Jake scratched his chin thoughtfully. The idea of flowers around his ranch house seemed frivolous, but he found himself reluctant to end this conversation. Emma was easy to talk to, and her enthusiasm was infectious in a way that made him feel more alive than he had in years. "What kinds of flowers grow well in this climate?" he asked, walking over to peer into the back of her truck. Emma's face brightened, and she eagerly showed him the various plants she had brought. There were hardy perennials that could survive the harsh winters, colorful annuals that would bloom all summer, and even some herbs that could be useful in cooking, she explained. Each plant with the expertise of someone who truly understood her craft. These black-eyed Susans are practically indestructible, she said, pointing to a flat of cheerful yellow flowers. And these purple coneflowers will attract butterflies and birds. They're native to this area, so they don't require much water or maintenance once they're established. Jake found himself genuinely interested in what she was saying. He had always appreciated things that were hardy and self-sufficient, qualities that these native plants apparently possessed. How much would something like this cost? He asked, gesturing toward a selection of the plants Emma quoted him a reasonable price for enough plants to create a small flower bed near his front porch. Jake considered it for a moment, then nodded his agreement. He told himself he was just being neighborly, supporting a new business in the community, but deep down, he knew he wanted an excuse to see Emma again. I could come back this weekend to plant them, if you'd like, Emma offered. I include installation in the price, and I can show you how to care for them so they'll thrive. Jake agreed, and they settled on Saturday morning for the planting. As Emma loaded the selected plants back into her truck, she chatted easily about her plans for the flower shop and her hopes for building a customer base in Millbrook. Jake found himself talking more than he had in months, sharing information about the local growing conditions and even offering to recommend her services to his neighbors. After Emma drove away, Jake stood in his driveway for several minutes, watching the dust settle on the road. Rusty sat beside him, tail wagging as if he too had enjoyed the visit. Jake realized that for the first time in 10 years, he was actually looking forward to something beyond his daily routine. The thought both excited and terrified him. He spent the rest of the day working with unusual efficiency, his mind occasionally wandering to Emma's bright smile and the way her eyes had sparkled when she talked about her flowers. Saturday seemed very far away. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for planting. Jake had been awake since 4:30, unable to sleep with the anticipation that he refused to acknowledge. He completed his morning chores with unusual speed and even found himself checking his appearance in the bathroom mirror, something he hadn't done in years. He told himself it was just common courtesy to look presentable when someone was doing work on his property. Emma arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, her truck loaded with the plants they had selected, along with tools and bags of soil amendments. She wore the same practical style of clothing, but today her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that somehow made her look even more beautiful. Jake helped her unload the supplies, noting how efficiently she organized everything. Plant the flower bed along the front of your porch, Emma suggested, kneeling down to examine the soil. The morning sun exposure is perfect here, and it'll be the first thing you see when you come home each day. Jake watched as she tested the soil with her hands, explaining how the clay content would affect drainage and what amendments they would need to add. Her knowledge was impressive, and Jake found himself comparing her expertise in plants to his own understanding of cattle. Both required careful observation, patience, and respect for natural processes. They worked side by side for the next 2 hours, digging holes and amending the soil. Emma chatted easily while they worked, sharing stories about her life in Phoenix and her dreams for her new business. Jake found himself opening up more than he had with anyone in years, telling her about his cattle operation and the history of his family's ranch. Your grandfather must have been quite a man to build all this, Emma said during a break, accepting the glass of water Jake had brought from the house. She looked across the pastures where his cattle grazed peacefully. Jake replied, following her gaze. He came here with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. My father continued that tradition, and I've tried to do the same. Emma nodded thoughtfully. There's something honorable about caring for the land and animals. In Phoenix, everything felt so artificial, so disconnected from anything real and lasting. This, she gestured toward his ranch, this has meaning. Jake felt a warmth in his chest at her words. Few people understood his connection to the land, the satisfaction that came from nurturing something and watching it thrive. Sarah had never grasped it, viewing the ranch as an obstacle to the exciting city life she craved, as they resumed planting. Emma asked about his cattle, and Jake found himself explaining the different breeds he raised and his breeding programs. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that showed she understood the complexity of what he did. When he mentioned his prize bull Thunder, she asked to meet him. Jake hesitated for a moment. Thunder was his pride and joy, magnificent black Angus that had cost him a small fortune but had proven his worth many times over in the quality of calves he sired. Jake rarely showed him to visitors, but something about Emma's sincere interest made him want to share this important part of his life. They walked to the pasture where Thunder grazed with several cows. The bull was impressive, standing nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing close to 2,000 pounds. His black coat gleamed in the sunshine, and his presence commanded respect from both the other cattle and anyone who saw him. "Magnificent," Emma breathed, her voice filled with genuine awe. "I can see why you're proud of him. Carries himself like royalty." Jake felt a surge of pride at her appreciation. He told her about Thunder's bloodline, his show victories, and the quality of his offspring. Emma listened intently, asking questions that showed she understood the genetics and breeding principles involved. "It's like creating art," she said. "Thoughtfully, you're selecting for the best traits and hoping they combine in the next generation to create something even better." Jake stared at her, amazed that she had grasped the essence of what drove his passion for cattle breeding. Sarah had always rolled her eyes when he talked about bloodlines and genetic improvement, claiming it was boring technical stuff that only interested other ranchers. They returned to finish planting the flowers, working in comfortable silence, punctuated by easy conversation. Emma showed him how to properly space the plants and explained how they would spread and fill in over time. Jake found himself paying close attention, not just to the planting techniques, but to the way Emma's face lit up. When she talked about how the garden would look in full bloom, when the last plant was in the ground and thoroughly watered, they stood back to admire their work. The small flower bed looked modest now, but Emma painted a picture of how it would appear in a few weeks when the plants were established and beginning to bloom. "Thank you for letting me do this," Emma said, beginning to pack up her tools. "It's been a perfect morning." Jake realized he didn't want her to leave. The ranch, which had always been his sanctuary, suddenly felt empty at the thought of returning to his solitary routine. "Would you like to stay for lunch?" he heard himself asking. "It's nothing fancy, just sandwiches, but you've worked hard. And it's the least I can offer." Emma's smile was radiant. "I'd love that." They sat on Jake's porch eating ham sandwiches and drinking iced tea, looking out over the newly planted flower bed to the pastures beyond. Emma asked more questions about ranch life, and Jake found himself describing the seasonal rhythms of his work, the satisfaction of seeing healthy calves born each spring, and the peaceful contentment of this way of life. "I envy you," Emma said. "Quietly, you found your place in the world, and you're completely at peace with it." Jake looked at her thoughtfully. "Weren't you happy with your flower shop in Phoenix?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "I was successful, but I wasn't truly happy. Something was always missing, though I couldn't identify what it was until I came here." As the afternoon wore on, Jake realized he hadn't enjoyed anyone's company this much in years. Emma was easy to be with, requiring no pretense or performance. She seemed genuinely interested in his life and opinions, and her own stories of city life and business ownership fascinated him in return. Over the following weeks, Jake found excuses to drive into town more frequently than usual. He would stop by Emma's flower shop, ostensibly to check on local business developments or to pick up supplies from nearby stores. Each visit revealed more progress as Emma transformed the former bakery into a charming flower shop called Wildflower Dreams. The old brick building had been given new life under Emma's care. She had painted the interior walls a warm cream color and installed large windows that allowed natural light to flood the space. Wooden shelves displayed an array of potted plants, fresh flowers, and gardening supplies. The sweet fragrance of roses and jasmine filled the air, creating an atmosphere that felt both professional and welcoming. Emma had proven to be not just knowledgeable about flowers, but also a savvy businesswoman. She had quickly established relationships with local suppliers and had begun offering services that the town had never had before. Wedding arrangements, funeral flowers, and custom garden designs were all part of her expanding repertoire. "Business has been better than I expected," Emma told Jake during one of his visits. She was arranging a bouquet of autumn flowers for Mrs. Henderson, whose husband owned the hardware store. "People here seem to appreciate having a florist in town instead of having to drive to the county seat." Jake watched her work, impressed by the artistic way she combined different flowers and foliage. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, creating something beautiful from what had been separate elements. There was a parallel to his own work with cattle, combining bloodlines to create something better than the individual parts. "Would you like to see what I'm planning for the Peterson place?" Emma asked. Pulling out a sketch pad, Mrs. Peterson had commissioned Emma to design flower beds around their farmhouse, and the detailed drawings showed Emma's vision for transforming the plain yard into a colorful garden. Jake studied the sketches, noting how Emma had considered the existing trees, the house's architecture, and the practical needs of elderly homeowners. "This is impressive work," he said sincerely. "You've thought of everything." Emma beamed at his praise. "I've been working on it for days. I want it to be perfect for them. They're such a sweet couple, and Mrs. Peterson has been bringing me cookies every week since I opened." Jake felt something shift in his chest as he watched Emma's genuine care for their neighbors. In Phoenix, she had probably dealt with wealthy clients who saw flowers as status symbols. Here in Millbrook, she was investing the same level of care and attention in projects for people who might not be able to pay premium prices. Their friendship had developed naturally over these visits. Emma would often close the shop and walk with Jake to Murphy's Diner for coffee, where they would sit in a back booth and talk for hours. Emma shared stories about learning the flower business from her grandmother, who had owned a small shop in New Mexico. Jake found himself opening up about his childhood on the ranch, his parents' deaths in a car accident 5 years ago, and even a little about Sarah's betrayal. "She didn't deserve you," Emma said quietly after Jake had reluctantly shared the story of his broken engagement. They were sitting on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The flower bed they had planted together was now blooming beautifully, adding splashes of color to the rustic setting. Jake felt a tightness in his throat at her words. "But I wasn't what she needed either. Ranch life isn't for everyone." Emma turned to look at him directly. "Anyone who truly loved you would want to be wherever you were happiest. This place," she gestured toward the rolling pastures and distant mountains, "this is where you belong." Someone who couldn't see that was looking at the wrong things. Jake met her gaze and felt something dangerous stirring in his heart. Emma's green eyes held a warmth and understanding that he had never experienced with anyone else. She saw him not as a project to be changed or a lifestyle to be endured, but as a man worthy of respect and affection exactly as he was. "What about you?" Jake asked, deflecting attention from his own vulnerability. "Was there someone special in Phoenix?" Emma shook her head. "I dated occasionally, but no one serious. Most of the men I met were either intimidated by a woman who owned her own business, or they saw me as a potential trophy wife. Neither situation interested me." Jake could understand both reactions. Emma was beautiful enough to be considered a trophy, but she was also clearly intelligent and independent enough to intimidate men who preferred more traditional relationships. He found both qualities attractive, though the realization troubled him. As autumn deepened into winter, their friendship continued to grow. Emma had proven herself to be not just beautiful and intelligent, but also kind, hardworking, and genuinely interested in becoming part of the Millbrook community. She had joined the church, volunteered for the annual Harvest Festival, and had donated flowers for several community events. Jake found himself looking forward to their time together, with an anticipation that reminded him uncomfortably of how he had felt about Sarah in the early days of their relationship. The comparison worried him. He had sworn never to make himself vulnerable to that kind of pain again. Yet Emma's presence in his life had become increasingly important to his daily happiness. One snowy December evening, Emma arrived at the ranch with a thermos of hot chocolate and a container of homemade cookies. They sat by Jake's fireplace, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind howl outside. Rusty lay contentedly at their feet, having adopted Emma as enthusiastically as Jake had. "I love winter evenings like this," Emma said, curling up in the leather chair across from Jake. "In Phoenix, I never experienced real seasons. Everything was just degrees of hot and sunny." Jake studied her face in the firelight, noting how relaxed and content she looked. "Do you ever miss city life? The restaurants, shopping, cultural events?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the convenience of having everything at my fingertips. But I don't miss the noise, the crowds, or the feeling that I was just one anonymous person among millions. Here, I matter to people, and they matter to me." Jake understood exactly what she meant. The connections formed in a small community were deeper and more meaningful than the superficial interactions of city life. He had never questioned his choice to stay on the ranch, but Emma's presence had made him appreciate aspects of his life that he had previously taken for granted. "I'm glad you decided to stay in Millbrook," Jake said quietly, and felt exposed by the admission. Emma smiled, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "So am I, more than you know?" Winter brought challenges that tested both Jake's resolve and Emma's commitment to her new life in Millbrook. A series of blizzards in January made travel difficult, and Jake found himself worrying about Emma in ways that surprised him. Her flower shop was located on Main Street, and the old building's heating system struggled against the bitter cold. When Jake learned that Emma was spending her evenings in the shop with space heaters to prevent her plants from freezing, he couldn't stand the thought of her being uncomfortable. Without asking permission, Jake drove his four-wheel drive truck through the snow to Emma's shop one particularly brutal evening. He found her bundled in layers of sweaters, tending to her plants with mittened hands. The sight of her sacrificing her own comfort for the flowers she cared about stirred something protective in Jake's chest. "This is ridiculous," he announced, startling Emma as he stomped snow off his boots. "You're going to make yourself sick. And these plants aren't worth your health." Emma looked up from the delicate orchid she was misting. "They'll die if I don't keep them warm enough. I can't afford to lose my entire winter inventory." Jake surveyed the shop's inadequate heating situation and made a decision that would have shocked him 6 months earlier. "Pack up what you can. You're bringing the most valuable plants to the ranch until this cold snap breaks." Emma stared at him in surprise. "Jake, I can't impose on you like that. Where would I even put them?" "My grandmother's sunroom," Jake replied, referring to the glass-enclosed room his grandmother had used for her sewing and which had been empty since her death 15 years ago. "It gets good light and stays warm because it's attached to the main heating system." Emma's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking. I'm offering." Jake was already calculating how many trips it would take to transport her plants safely. "We'll get the tender ones tonight and come back for the rest tomorrow." They worked together until nearly midnight, carefully loading Emma's most precious plants into Jake's heated truck and transporting them to the ranch. The sunroom, which had been gathering dust for years, suddenly came alive with greenery and color. Emma walked among the plants, checking each one and adjusting their positions to optimize light exposure. "They'll be perfect here," she said, turning to face Jake with shining eyes. "I can't believe you're doing this for me." Jake felt uncomfortable with her gratitude. He told himself he was just being a good neighbor, helping out a local business owner, but the truth was more complicated. The thought of Emma suffering from the cold had been unbearable, and seeing her plants threatened had felt like watching someone attack something precious to her. "It's nothing," he muttered, but Emma stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of flowers. "It's not nothing to me," she said softly. "In Phoenix, I had acquaintances and business contacts, but no one who would have gone out of their way to help like this." "Thank you, Jake." Before Jake could respond, Emma rose on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek gently. The brief contact sent electricity through his entire body, and he stood frozen as she stepped back. Emma seemed to realize what she had done and blushed deeply, but she didn't apologize or try to take it back. "I should get back to town," she said quietly. "The roads might get worse." Jake drove Emma back to her apartment above the flower shop, his mind racing during the silent journey. The kiss had been innocent, a simple gesture of gratitude, but it had awakened feelings he had spent years trying to suppress. Emma's presence in his life had become essential to his happiness, and the realization terrified him. Over the next week, Emma came to the ranch every morning to tend to her plants in the sunroom. Jake found excuses to be nearby, ostensibly working on indoor projects, but really wanting to watch Emma work. She moved among her plants with the same gentle efficiency she brought to everything else, talking to them softly and adjusting their care with scientific precision. "You really love them?" Jake observed one morning. Watching Emma repot a flowering plant that had outgrown its container, Emma smiled, her hands gentle as she settled the plant into its new home. Plants are honest. They respond to good care and wither with neglect. There's no pretense or manipulation, just natural cause and effect. I find that restful. Jake understood her meaning. In his experience with people, especially women, there had often been hidden agendas and unspoken expectations. Emma's straightforward nature was as refreshing as her love for growing things. The cold snap finally broke in mid-February, and Jake knew it was time to help Emma move her plants back to the shop. Neither of them mentioned the approaching move, but Jake could feel Emma's sadness at the thought of their daily visits ending. He felt the same reluctance, though he tried to hide it. On the last morning of the plant's stay at the ranch, Emma lingered longer than usual in the sunroom. Jake found her sitting quietly among the flowers, looking pensive and beautiful in the morning light streaming through the glass walls. "Penny for your thoughts," Jake said, settling into a chair beside her. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Been happier these past few weeks than I've been in years. Having a purpose here, feeling needed and appreciated. It's made me realize how lonely I was in Phoenix, even when I was successful." Jake felt his heart clench at her words. Emma had become the bright spot in his days, the person he looked forward to seeing and talking to. The ranch would feel empty without her regular presence, but he couldn't ask her to stay just for his sake. "You'll always be welcome here, Jake," said carefully. "Even after your plants go back to the shop." Emma turned to look at him directly, her green eyes searching his face. "Will I, Jake? Sometimes I feel like you're holding something back, like you're afraid of letting me get too close." Jake felt exposed under her perceptive gaze. Emma had seen through his careful defenses, recognizing the walls he had built around his heart. The smart thing would be to reinforce those walls, to keep her at a safe distance where she couldn't hurt him. But looking at her face, seeing the genuine affection and concern in her eyes, Jake felt his resolve weakening. "I've been hurt before," he admitted quietly. "It made me careful about trusting people." Emma reached over and placed her hand gently over his. "I would never hurt you intentionally, Jake. I care about you too much." The simple touch of her hand and the sincerity in her voice nearly undid him. Jake wanted to tell her how he felt. Wanted to pull her into his arms and kiss her properly, but fear held him back. What if he was wrong about her feelings? What if she left him like Sarah had? What if he wasn't enough to keep her happy in Millbrook? Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that Jake hadn't experienced in a decade. Emma's plants were back in her shop, thriving after their winter stay at the ranch, and her business was flourishing. She had been hired to design flower arrangements for 3 weddings, had contracted to maintain the landscaping at the bank, was planning an ambitious garden project for the town square. Jake found himself making even more frequent trips to town, drawn by Emma's infectious enthusiasm and the way her presence had begun to transform not just her own business but the entire community. Other shop owners on Main Street had started sprucing up their storefronts, inspired by the beauty Emma had brought to the formerly empty bakery building. However, Jake's happiness was shadowed by a growing fear that he was falling in love with Emma. Despite his best efforts to maintain emotional distance, every smile she gave him, every moment of shared laughter, every casual touch of her hand made it harder to pretend his feelings were merely friendly. The walls around his heart, so carefully constructed after Sarah's betrayal, were crumbling. Under Emma's gentle but persistent presence, the crisis came on a warm April afternoon when Jake arrived at Emma's shop to find her crying over a letter she held in her trembling hands. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, and Jake felt his heart stop at the pain he saw in her face. "What's wrong?" he asked. Rushing to her side and taking the letter from her hands before she could protest, the letter was from a large commercial development company in Phoenix. They were offering Emma a substantial amount of money to return to the city and manage the floral operations for a chain of luxury hotels they were developing across the Southwest. The salary was 3 times what she could ever hope to earn in Millbrook, and the letter emphasized the prestige and career advancement opportunities the position would provide. They tracked me down through my former business contacts, Emma said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The offer is incredible, Jake. More money than I ever dreamed of making, full benefits, a company car, even help with relocating. Jake felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. The letter represented everything he had feared since the day Emma had first driven up to his ranch. She was talented and ambitious, and Millbrook was a small town with limited opportunities. Of course, someone would eventually recognize her abilities and try to lure her back to a bigger stage. It sounds like an amazing opportunity, Jake managed to say, though the words felt like glass in his throat. You'd be crazy not to consider it seriously. Emma looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hurt. Is that really what you think? That I should take it? Jake's instinct was to tell her to stay, to beg her not to leave him, to confess his love, and ask her to choose him over the glittering promises of city success. But Sarah's betrayal had taught him that trying to hold someone against their best interests only led to resentment and eventual abandonment. If Emma was meant to leave, better to let her go gracefully than to guilt her into staying and watch her grow unhappy over time. I think you should do whatever makes you happiest, Jake said, each word carefully controlled to hide his anguish. You're too talented to waste your potential in a small town if bigger opportunities are calling. Emma stared at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face for something she apparently didn't find. I see, she said quietly. Well, they want an answer within a week. Jake nodded and made some excuse about needing to get back to the ranch. He left Emma's shop feeling like his world was collapsing around him. That evening, he sat on his porch with Rusty at his feet, staring at the flower bed they had planted together the previous fall. The plants were beginning to show new growth after the winter, small green shoots pushing up through the soil with determined optimism that mocked Jake's despair. For 3 days, Jake avoided going into town. He threw himself into ranch work with desperate intensity, but nothing could distract him from thoughts of Emma leaving. He imagined her in a sleek city office, arranging flowers for wealthy hotel guests, living a sophisticated life that had no room for a simple rancher from a small mountain town. On the 4th day, Mrs. Peterson called to tell him that Emma had been asking about him, wondering if he was all right since she hadn't seen him. The concern in the elderly woman's voice made Jake realize that his absence had been noticed and was causing worry. Despite his own pain, he couldn't bear the thought of Emma thinking something was wrong with him. That evening, Jake drove to Emma's apartment above the flower shop, found her sitting on the small balcony she had decorated with potted plants. Reading a book in the fading daylight, she looked up when she heard his truck, and the relief on her face made his chest tight. I was worried about you, she said, setting down her book and standing up. Mrs. Peterson said you hadn't been to town in days. I'm fine, Jake lied. Just busy with spring work on the ranch. Have you made your decision about the job offer? Ring up Sue's face grew serious. I've been thinking about it constantly. It's a life-changing opportunity, the kind of break most people in my field only dream about. Jake braced himself for the inevitable announcement that she was leaving. Instead, Emma surprised him by walking closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. But I realized something important while I've been thinking about it, she continued. Success isn't just about money or prestige or career advancement. It's about being where you belong with people who matter to you. What? Jake felt a flicker of hope but was afraid to trust it. What are you saying? Emma reached out and took his hands in hers, her touch warm and steady. I'm saying that I turned down the job this morning. Millbrook is my home now, and I don't want to be anywhere else. Felt his carefully constructed emotional walls finally crumble completely. Emma, are you sure? That was an incredible opportunity. I don't want you to regret staying because of ... friendships here. Emma smiled, and Jake saw something in her expression that made his heart race. Jake Morrison, are you really so blind? That you think I'd give up my dream job just to maintain a friendship? Before Jake could respond, Emma rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. Not the gentle peck on the cheek from months earlier, but a real kiss that left no doubt about her feelings. Jake's arms came around her automatically, pulling her closer as 10. Years of loneliness and fear melted away under the warmth of her lips. When they finally broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers, hardly believing this moment was real. "I love you," he whispered. The words he had been afraid to say, finally finding their voice. "I've been fighting it for months, but I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Emma replied, her voice soft, but certain. "I have since that first day when you helped me plant flowers and showed me your world with such pride and gentleness." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Millbrook, Jake held Emma close and finally allowed himself to believe in love again. The cowboy who had sworn off romance had been conquered not by someone who wanted to change him, but by a woman who had seen his worth exactly as he was and chosen to build her life beside him. 6 months later, Jake and Emma were married in the small church at the end of Main Street, surrounded by the entire population of Millbrook. Emma wore wildflowers in her hair and carried a bouquet of the same hardy native plants they had planted together in their first flower bed. As they exchanged vows, Jake realized that love hadn't been his enemy after all. He had just been waiting for the right person to ride into his life and show him that the best partnerships, like the best gardens, grew stronger and more beautiful with time, care, and trust.